Two of the most misunderstood words in the English language are the words Philadelphia and the word random. Philadelphia, as lots of school kids learn, it means city of brotherly love. And you have this image of Quakers wearing funky looking hats and shoes with buckles on them. Maybe there's a turkey around. I know it sounds like a pilgrim, but I think they were kind of the same. Anyway, so the Quakers are over here in Pennsylvania, holding hands, making plans, singing Kumbaya, spreading peace and love all over the colonies. That's Philadelphia, right? No, not really. Philadelphia is a Greek word, really a Spartan word. Now okay, I'm giving away the game here because the Spartans were not really known for peace, love, and harmony. No, this was a culture that valued war skills. This was a culture that valued skills in combat. From a very, very early age, lots of their young men were set aside and trained in the rigorous life of the soldier. So they were very successful in, marching all over Greece, conquering here, conquering there, conquering everywhere. And they developed a word for the bond that formed between the soldiers who have been in combat together. Because the Spartans figured out when you go to war, the soldiers aren't really fighting for the country, or in this case, the city-state. They're really fighting for their comrades. And it wasn't something they had to force on. It was just something that developed, and everybody since then has noticed that develops. Anyone's ever been in combat will tell you this. There's a bond that forms between soldiers. It's a bond of love. That is Philadelphia. It's a bond between soldiers. So we don't really think about that much when we think about Philadelphia. Hi, this is Colin Flaherty. Welcome to my podcast. Here we talk about black violence, wildly out of proportion, and how so many reporters and public officials and other people are in denial, deceit, and delusion about it, and how they have created the greatest hoax, the greatest myth of our lifetime, the myth of black victimization. So we expose this here every day in this podcast, on my videos, on my Twitter, Facebook, over at minds.com. We expose this every day. And we do it all without racism, without rancor, without apology. Now let's get back to the second most misunderstood word, the word we really want to focus on in this podcast. And that is the word random. That is one word that is misused by more reporters than any other word I can imagine. Every time I hear a reporter use that word, it reminds me of the definition of the word journalism. Journalism, they say, is the art of writing with absolute authority about something you know nothing about. And when you hear all these journalists using the word random over and over and over, I've given away the game again. Because if the same thing happens over and over and over, then it's not random, is it? One of my buddies, it may be a slight overstatement to say he's my buddy, but it's somebody I'm very fond of. Somebody wrote a book about the world's biggest gamblers and most successful gamblers. And he was featured in chapter 1 of this book. So he told a story about when he lived in Las Vegas, especially right when, I think this might have been in the early 80s. He had a crew of guys that would go to the different casinos and watch the roulette wheel. They would just mark down what numbers came up. They were looking for a crooked wheel, not a wheel the casino made crooked, just a wheel that was out of balance. So they found a wheel that was slightly out of balance, and some numbers were coming up, some numbers were not. Let me rephrase that. Some numbers were definitely coming up more, and some numbers were coming up less. It wasn't a huge difference, but it was a difference that if you stayed on the table for any period of time, you could take advantage of and win some money. So immediately he got on the phone, he flooded the table with his crew, other crews. And pretty soon they stayed there all night playing this wheel, and they won $1 million. They won $1 million just by exploiting just a very slight tendency of a couple numbers to come up and a very slight tendency of a couple numbers not to come up, all because of this crooked wheel. That's what random is about. That wheel wasn't random, though not one person in a 1,000 could have guessed it by just sitting there and playing, because you just wouldn't have occurred to you that it wasn't random. That's how subtle it is to kick something out of being random. Even so, when reporters come up against something they can't explain, all they do is say, "Well, that's random, Colin. What about the pattern?" "No, it's a random pattern." I mean, these people just use words as if they have no meaning when they do have meaning. And so very, very often on this channel, whenever the fellas are up to some bad business, a reporter walks in there and sees a bunch of fellas up to some bad business, and even the reporter knows, boy, this looks a lot like the bad business that happened the day before, the day before, the day before, and the day before. Yeah, it looks like there's a pattern of black violence. In other words, it looks random. Why don't we look at one recent story that really led to tipping over some dominoes to a bunch of other recent stories, all documenting the same random pattern. Somebody sent me the story of one of the fellas committing a random attack on the campus of the University of Wisconsin in Madison. So I thought I'd do a little search for it. I took the headline, put it in DuckDuckGo, popped it in, and I found the attack in Wisconsin, one of the fellas. But then something very strange happened. A bunch of other random attacks, almost identical in nature, started showing up.
Officers got a call around 3:30 from people in the area who saw a man dragging a woman toward Lake Mendota. They then found a 19-year-old with multiple injuries to her face. Police are saying it appeared to be a random attack. Police say the suspect is a black male.
Now to a random attack in Ocean County. A man has been arrested after police say he stabbed a person inside Lakewood's town hall, then punched a police officer.
The Ocean County Prosecutor's Office tells us Reginald Patillo stabbed another Lakewood resident inside the town's municipal building.
Police say the Raleigh man randomly picked his victim and subjected her to a violent, torturous attack. The woman was kidnapped, raped, and beaten. She took multiple blows to the head and was strangled.
8 anti-Semitic hate crimes took place in the first 3 weeks of 2018 compared to 15 this year, several in Crown Heights. This unprovoked attack took place January 16th on Kingston Avenue. 22-year-old Mendel Super was also attacked in that same area. In the video, the 51-year-old victim is shoved to the ground, kicked and punched by 3 suspects. This incident said to be connected to the first.
You remember that optical illusion that was popular about 10 years ago? It looked like a bunch of random dots, and then you kept looking at it, and all of a sudden, this big image would pop out at your face. That's what these videos are. Keep looking and looking and looking and keep hearing random, random, random. All of a sudden, they're not random anymore. But every time a reporter visits a crime scene and the reporter recognizes that it's part of a pattern and they don't tell us, well, that's a lie of omission, just as bad as any other lie. I mean, the only other alternative is the reporter's too dense not to see the pattern, like this story out of LaGrange, Georgia.
Police are trying to figure out who murdered a young father in LaGrange who gave strangers a ride on Saturday night. 24-year-old James Jake Ponder leaves behind 2 young children, and the mother of those children told Fox 5's Portia Bruner she desperately hopes that someone will tell police who killed the love of her life and why.
This was senseless. This was somebody's son, somebody's father.
Alicia Green is one of many folks here in LaGrange outraged over the murder of 24-year-old James Jake Ponder. Police say the young father of 2 was fatally shot Saturday night on Troop Street after he agreed to give 2 strangers a ride.
He was trying to do a favor, young guy, and lost his life.
LaGrange Police Detective William Nelson says Ponder was with a friend on Troop Street around 8:30 p.m. Saturday when 2 strangers asked him for a ride. He agreed. Minutes later, he was murdered. Police will not release the name of the friend who was with Ponder that night.
So it's for safety reasons, not because you guys suspect that he had anything to do with Jake's death?
That is correct. We do not suspect that he had anything to do with the death.
After they shot Jake, did they point the gun at him? Did they threaten him in any way?
He indicated that he never looked at them, that he put his head down and waited until everything stopped, and then subsequently drove his friend to the hospital.
Jake had a 2-year-old daughter named Jersey, a 7-month-old son named Caden, and a young soulmate named Layla, a young woman who described Jake as an amazing father and the first and only love of her life. Alicia Green hopes someone will come forward for the sake of Ponder's heartbroken family.
So many patterns in this story. I mean, how many times have we seen the Good Samaritan end up killed by the side of the road? Many times. How many times do we see an episode of black on white violence and robbery and even murder, as in this case, begin with a question, a favor? Hey man, can you give me $1 so I can get some bus fare to go to my grandmother's funeral? Hey man, can I borrow your cell phone? Hey man, do you know what time it is? Hey man, can you give me a ride? The fellas don't need to know what time it is. They already know. They have cell phones. Their grandmother didn't die. And the only place they need a ride to is to take you somewhere other than here. That's a pattern. That's something we document here all the time. That's something that reporters, by refusing to document this, by refusing to talk about it, by refusing to let people know what's up, they now must be considered an accessory to this murder. Anybody that's a reporter within 100 miles of that place that didn't let people know there's something bad happening around there and everywhere else in this country, well, that's on you now. That's on you for not letting those people know what the world really looks like. Because guess what? That's your job. And what about these patterns? What about these patterns at school? I mean, how many patterns have we documented at school? If you send a white kid to a school with lots of black people in it, you are guilty of child abuse. That is a pattern, 100% of a pattern. Notice I didn't say 99%. Notice I didn't say most of the times. No, you send your kid to a black school, you are guilty of child abuse. We've said that many, many times here. So many parents, so many seemingly single parents, single moms, they're in this little fantasy bubble where they can send their little white kid into a lion's den with black children and think the kid won't be a target. What kind of stupid world are you living in? You're living in a world where you put your kid at risk, just like this.
Cell phone video shows a fight in an Akron classroom Friday. 12-year-old Liam Zirkle says he was attacked and ended up on the ground being kicked by this group of students.
Oh my God.
More than 30 seconds into the video, a teacher tells students to chill out before stepping in.
I am disgusted. I could not believe there was 2 teachers like 5 feet from him.
Mom Autumn Zirkle says an Innis Community Learning Center administrator called her about the fight before sending Liam home on the bus. But she says she did not know how serious it was until she saw video being shared online.
I shook all night. I was sick to my stomach. I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking, like, my baby was in the fight of his life.
She says the fight left Liam with a bruised wrist, head injuries, and symptoms of a concussion. Autumn says her son had been bullied by the students for months.
You worry about him in the bathrooms, in the hallways. I don't worry about my kids in the classroom. You think there's an adult there. I would have wanted a police report made. I would have wanted an ambulance called. I would not have wanted my son sent on the bus with head injuries that weren't checked out. I would have wanted at least a school nurse to look him over. I would have liked to have been told the extent so I could have been down there at the school.
District policy requires teachers to call for help during a fight, tell students to stop, and minimize other students' involvement, but not step in to break it up. Autumn says school staff should have done more to help.
The schools need to do better at protecting our children.
Wouldn't it be pretty if that were true? But it's not true. That's not a luxury you get. You're not allowed to turn the responsibility for your child's safety over to a stranger. Yeah, the principal and the teachers and at your school are strangers. We gave you one job: protect the kid, keep the kid safe. And the first chance you had, you turned your most important responsibility over to people you don't even know. I can't help but think at times like this, of all the times that I've heard in the last couple of generations, the last 20, 30, 40 years, how single parenthood is okay, fathers aren't needed, mothers are the most important thing. This is why we need dads. We need dads to protect the kids. And maybe part of being a dad, maybe part of protecting a kid is teaching a kid about what to do in a situation like that. But I really don't want to go down that road because that was one kid against 5 or 6. And so that mom's duty is protect the kid. I mean, I'm sorry, that's your job. You're not allowed to pretend you didn't know anything about it. Just the other day, I put that on here. I put the video on here, but there's not really much audio we can do with it. But there's a 1-minute video from a school bus, and there's a little. She's blurred out. I hate when they blur these things out. There's a little blonde-haired girl sitting on the short bus, sitting in a harness, in a chair. She's facing towards the back of the bus. And 3 or 4 times during this 1 minute, a black kid comes up, either sits in the chair next to her or sits right next to her and slaps her, punches her. Later on, they even found bite marks on her. And you heard the girl screaming. She was screaming like a cat trapped in a cage, a feral cat trapped in a cage. She was screaming like one of these wild animals caught in a trap you see on TV. You know, I mean, really feral, primal. This black kid, 9-year-old black kid, just kept abusing and assaulting this 4-year-old girl. The bus driver is less than 10 feet away, maybe 5 feet. The black bus driver didn't do a thing. The girl is screaming. She's autistic. They get to the bus stop, and you see all this on video. They get to the bus stop, and then later we learn that the parents go, "Hey, why is our daughter, screaming?" And the driver said, "I don't know what happened, man. She's just crying today." Well, that little black kid was assaulting that girl, and the black bus driver didn't do a damn thing about it. Now the parents are suing. Oh, by the way, you know what? That's we did a video here. It was a couple years ago, but the parents stayed in touch with me. It was almost like kind of identical to this. It was like, except it was like 13-year-old boy, and he was being the fellas were attacking him at school. The father went in and said, guys better knock it off. So the principal assured him they would. The 14-year-old boy's going home on a bus. Same fellas get on the bus. They beat the crap out of him on video. The father sued and won. Message to parents. That school is responsible for if they allow your child to be placed in a dangerous environment. But still, come on. You have to keep your eyes open as a parent. You have to keep your ears open, your heart open. You have to keep your brain open. You can't put your kids in a dangerous situation and justify it in the sense that maybe you'll be able to sue somebody later on, or maybe that principal will get in trouble if they allow your kid to be assaulted over a long period of time. So now we have to ask, what, nobody told her? Or was the universe telling her in a lot of different ways and she just shut down and didn't want to hear it? because it was easier not to hear it. It was more convenient not to hear it. It reinforced this crazy little fairy tale life she's living, that black people are not hostile to white people in these schools. Did you hear the little bits of truth slipping out there? Oh yeah, that's been happening there for a long time. He's been bullied for a long time in that school. Wow. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you other than if you know somebody with a white kid at a black school, please let them see this video. Please tell them their child is not safe. Please tell them their child is probably being abused right now. Why don't we take a short break for a good old commercial message from good old Colin. You know, one of the common themes on this channel is denial. And the trolls that's their common theme among the trolls. And so when the trolls try to, change the topic and deflect and everything, one of their favorite things to say is, well, Colin, what's your solution? Well, my solution is everybody has to do what they can. So, not everybody's in a position to contribute to the solution, but my solutions aren't really that complicated. If you clunk somebody over the head, you're going to jail. If you're ignorant of what the world looks like, we will educate you. I mean, that's pretty simple, right? Nobody wants to go there because they don't want solutions. They just want to deflect off this ridiculous level of black violence and criminality that we see existing all over the country. And so here's the answer to what you can do. If you're wondering what you can do, what your solution is. Your solution is you do what you can. Not everybody, we're all not living in the same world. Listen, we're living in a world now where, congressmen are getting fired when they lift their eyebrow up and misspeak using anything having to do with the word race. So don't think that you're immune if you work in a cubicle, or you're a teacher or a firefighter or a cop, or you work for some government agency. Don't think you are immune. You're not. And so if you want to support this channel, do it. Find another way to do it besides taking my most excellent books, Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, into your workplace and, walking around like a member of Jehovah's Witnesses, telling everybody about it. No, you will get fired. We don't want that. We want you to stay employed. We want you to stay supportive. And so here's what you can do. You can share these videos. You can engaging with these platforms that I am on is very important because that's how Twitter and Facebook and all these other people know. That's how they know who is interested in receiving my videos and my tweets and my Facebook postings. That's really important. So that's just something simple you can do. Share, like, subscribe, comment. Those are 4 things right there. Those are 4 really important messages to the owner of Twitter and Facebook and all the other platforms I'm on, that Colin is doing something that people want to see and hear. And even though, they are shadow banning us. Yes, believe me, nobody knows more about the whole shadow banning than good old Colin. Nobody's been at the tip of the spear longer than I have been on it. Even so, that means we still have to share, like, subscribe, comment. Okay? And if you want to take it to another level after that, support. If you're not in a position to do more to expose the greatest lie of our generation, the greatest hoax of our lifetime, the myth of black victimization, and how so many people are in denial, deceit, and delusion about it, if you're not in a position to do that, well, support people who are. That would be people like good old Colin. I mean, we're all finding out now. You're finding out, I'm finding out that people with any kind of conservative or alternative message, We're just not going to be able to put up videos and content that attracts advertising. That's just not going to happen. And so it's really going to have to be a bond between me and you. That's the way this is going to happen and grow and flourish. So if the spirit moves you, go over to PayPal, paypal.me/Flaherty457, paypal.me/Flaherty457, drop a few pennies, a few coins in the cup over there. Or go to myminds.com/Colin Flaherty page. You'll see my address. You can put a little something in the U.S. mail. That would be just as well. I mean, on a bigger level, I mean, we're not going to win. We are not going to win in exposing this hoax by waiting for the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the LA Times, and the Chicago Tribune to figure it out. That's not going to happen. CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, they are never going to figure this out. They already figured it out. They already know that black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything, especially why you are responsible. You are. You're listening to this. You're responsible. I don't care if your parents had slaves or not, or grandparents had slaves or not. I don't care. I don't care if you're marching down Main Street carrying a Confederate flag or not. It doesn't matter. Even if you're not one of the 12 people in this country who believe in white supremacy, it doesn't matter. You are a beneficiary of a system of white supremacy that has existed for 4,400, 4 million, 4 billion years. You must pay. And the TV stations and the newspapers looking the other way in the middle of this tsunami of black violence and dysfunction, that is part of the price that you have to pay because of that. That's what we're fighting here. That's why I'm so proud to receive all the support and all the friendship I do receive here. So thank you guys for making that all happen. And thanks for keeping it coming. Okay, let's get back to another school story. In a way, this story is kind of the opposite of the one we just did. But here's a story about a principal who, it's kind of the opposite, but it's really kind of the same. I mean, so here we get the story about a principal. He takes personal responsibility, he says, for all the black violence in his school, especially the violence that was just a couple weeks ago where he was beat up pretty good. He said it's his fault. He didn't reach them and touch them. He didn't reach them and educate them. Okay, you know what? I kind of appreciate that, but at the same time, it's not quite right, is it? It doesn't really ring the right bell, does it? Because it doesn't really make sense for anybody, for that principal, for you or I, to take responsibility for things we did not do. Let's hear the story first.
Now, the Williamson High School principal was brutally assaulted during a fight on campus 3 weeks ago. His wounds are healing, but only the ones you can see. Our Tyler Fingert is live in the newsroom tonight. Tyler, tell us how he's doing.
He's doing well, Lenise and Byron, especially when you look at him. But Kervin Lang says it's more psychological because some of the people who attacked him were his very own students. Tonight, this new video shows the chaos on campus.
They were going at somebody else. They had an altercation with the previous day, and I was trying to stop them. And then it got escalating. I think because I didn't allow them to get to them, they got mad at me.
Police say the fight broke out on January 18th when a group of suspended Williamson students and 3 non-students came on campus. When Principal Kervin Lang tried to break it up, he was punched in the face.
I failed to teach them. And when they released out on me, it kind of hurt. And that was the personal part of it. It hurt because that means I didn't do a good job. That means I failed somewhere.
Mobile County Public Schools says no students were hurt in the fight. Police say 3 teens and 1 adult were arrested for their part. Lang says he's still recovering weeks later.
I'm recovering right now. Psychologically, it had a big effect on me because at the end, I lost because those were my boys.
But back on campus, this shows how quickly things can escalate. Lang says it's hard because he's been with some of these students since middle school.
I mean, I failed because I didn't do my job. I didn't do a good job of making sure that they was in school and that they were being properly educated.
And so by the principal assuming all this responsibility for things that he is not responsible for, that's a deflection again. That's a deflection from the people who are responsible for a pattern of violence in that school, among black people in that school. It's a pattern of school officials, not just there, but all over the country, looking at black students, seeing this enormous level of dysfunction, bad behavior, bad grades, looking at them and going, well, you little angels are not at fault because this is the fault of, and then you reach into your Collins bag of 1 million excuses and pull one out at random and read it. And there's your excuse. I mean, what could be more corrosive? What could be more damaging than to see somebody going on the wrong path and telling them they're on the right path because it's not their fault? Yeah, go ahead. No, you're going down the violent path. Go right on down there because it's not your fault. Hey, won't I end up in prison if I stay on that path? Yeah, you will, but don't worry about it. That won't be your fault either. It'll be the fault of white racism. So when you go to prison, you'll meet lots of other people who are down with the idea that black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything. So when you come out of prison, you'll have a job. Your job will be to be pissed off at white people all the time because they forced you to commit all this crime and violence that landed you in prison. Sound good? There's your career. I'm your career. I'm your guidance counselor. Go ahead. Do what I just said. Yeah, you'll turn out just fine.
Here is a look at that cell phone video of the coach beating up the student in a classroom. We learned the coach started punching the boy after the boy threw a chair at the man. All new tonight, the teenager's guardian is speaking out for the first time and explaining why the boy snapped. Channel 2's Matt Johnson is live in Riverdale in Clayton County. And Matt, she says the coach said something unkind to the teenager just a few minutes earlier.
The student's family says it all started with a joke about what he had on his head, a stocking cap like this one. From there, a student started recording a fight inside of a classroom involving an adult we now know is a coach. From there, the child's family reached out to us to say the school let him down.
I was so hurt and distraught.
Cell phone video that shows a high school football coach punching a student in class is hard for Yaquanda Lucas to watch. We blurred the coach's face because he hasn't been charged with the crime.
They didn't look like restraining him to me. It looked like you beat my child.
Sorry, Laquanda. Yeah, they briefly mentioned this at the beginning of the video. Then about what seems like an hour later, they kind of remind us of it again. That the young fella, the 14-year-old fella, he wasn't a child. He wasn't acting childish when he picked up a desk and he threw it at the coach. For some reason, the coach didn't think that was good behavior in the classroom, and he tried to restrain the child air quotes. All of a sudden, there's a huge brawl. No, the kid attacked the coach. Yes, the coach was defending himself on video. Didn't look that good. Especially if you didn't see the first part of the video where the kid throws the desk. Now everybody wants to know why the coach is such a bad person. Now everybody wants to ignore the pattern of violence in that school among black students, a pattern that exists directed at students and at teachers all over the country. Everybody knows it exists. Everybody wants to pretend it doesn't exist or it has no meaning. As long as the reporters can ignore what's going on, that's a signal to everybody else. They can ignore it too without worrying about the consequences. You know, one of the things I want to start doing on these podcasts is reminding people of a story or two from my book, Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. And for some reason, cops and reporters, they just won't take this whole business of black on white violence. The last story we saw was the teacher was black. They just don't take it seriously. They think they can ignore it because maybe they can't do anything about it, so let's just ignore it, and maybe the white parent will move away or just figure out a way to make their own peace. Let's read this story from Middletown, Ohio. Middleton, Ohio. It's a story that, well, I call the worst story, and from the book, Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. The worst one almost got away. Black mom terrorizes a single white mom. Official shrug. Here, so the chapter begins here. So I finished the book, this book, but I thought I would take one more look through my files. The thousands of stories and links and videos and 911 calls and emails and tweets and Facebook posts that I archive, all about black violence. Within 5 minutes after reviewing just a fraction of the material, I came across this episode of black mob violence that just might be the worst of all. And I missed it the first time around. Here's a story from Middletown, Ohio, from the spring of the year 2014. But it really starts the year before. That is when Jennifer Chitwood and her 2 small children returned home on Thanksgiving Day to find a group of black people burglarizing her house. They were stealing her flat-screen TV. She called the police and they arrested one person. The thieves and their friends did not like that. They called her a cop caller. You know, the same kind of witness intimidation that the district attorney in Philadelphia and lots of other cities say is epidemic. Local law enforcement greeted this news with a shrug after the, quote, neighborhood teenagers, unquote, began the threats, harassment, vandalism, violence, and ultimately the arson that would burn her house down. Finally, it happened. In May of 2013, dozens of black people were in her front yard, backyard, banging on her door, firing pellet guns, throwing lit flares, yelling death threats, trying to break in. The 911 operator greeted her emergency call the same way police and prosecutors greeted her plea for help from this black mob violence and witness intimidation, with a curious indifference.
Questions tonight about how a 911 dispatcher handled a frightened caller in Middletown who said teens were trying to kick in her door.
This happened hours before someone set Jennifer Saylor's house on fire on Tuesday night. At times, the 911 dispatcher seems to get impatient with Saylor. 9 on Your Side's Jason Law has more on that terror-stricken call.
Some people love Middletown 911 dispatcher Crank, where is your emergency?
Just hours before police say someone torched her house, Jennifer Saylor called 911 from inside her home after she said teenagers began throwing bricks and kicking in her door.
They've been calling fighting for days. Okay, I can't hear you. Ma'am, you need to stop yelling. I can't hear you.
Dustin locked my door and tried to kick my door in.
What is your address? What is your address?
Roosevelt Boulevard.
Okay, are they...
They're threatening to shoot my house and everything.
Okay, who is it?
Some kids I called the police on for breaking into my house, and they've been trying to...
Are they kicking at your door? Answer my questions. Are they there right now?
They're kicking at my door.
Ma'am, I can't help. Ma'am, you have to stop screaming. I can't help you until you stop screaming.
The dispatcher seems to grow frustrated and eventually tells Saylor she has to hang up the phone.
Here you open my house. I can't open my doors.
Don't open the door then. Stay in your house. Easy. Stay in your house till we get there. Okay?
I can't get out anyways.
Stay in your house. Stay in your house until we get there.
I'm not hanging up the phone until
I have to hang up the phone, ma'am. I have to. I cannot stay on the phone with you.
And that was Jason Law reporting. Saylor later told 9 on Your Side she was really, really scared. She said, "I've never been that scared in my life. I thought they were going to come in and kill me and my kids." Police have charged one 17-year-old for the arson.
All right, let's get back to the book. The local reporters did not see anything urgent about it either. Jennifer Chitwood, quote, Jennifer Chitwood said, she left with her family a few hours before the fire because of a disturbance at her home, said the local 12 News. A disturbance? when you listen to the 911 calls and decide for yourself if that is a disturbance or a full-blown life-threatening emergency. 2 hours later, her house was a smoldering ruin. Police arrested 2 suspects and quickly dropped charges against 1, and that was it. No bigger story about it anywhere until a week later when some clown started dropping flyers into the neighborhood saying he was going to start a white neighborhood watch, unquote. Wow. Now that was national news. Ohio town investigates racist flyers employing the white guard to stand against black criminals. That's from the Daily News in New York. By August 2014, a teenager pled guilty to a misdemeanor in connection with the arson. The local paper described it as an ongoing dispute between a group of neighborhood juveniles and Jennifer Chitwood, who lived in the home that was burned down, is thought to be the motive for the arson. Unquote. Ongoing dispute. The only dispute was whether Jennifer Chitwood should stand by and allow this large group of black people to steal her stuff, threaten her family, burn her home, and end her life. All of which happened over a period of 6 months while police, prosecutors, and press did nothing but shrug, shrug, and shrug. Wow. I mean, really, is there any difference between that story we just read in Ohio and some of the other stories we see here? It's just a matter of degree, as far as I can tell. Large group of black people are burglarizing her house. This white mom of 2 kids calls the cops. For the next 6 months, they're doing drive-bys, they're harassing her, they're yelling, until finally one night it culminates in an arson. And the reporters and the cops in that town did the exact same thing that every other reporter did in this podcast. They just shrugged. There was no pattern. It was random. Black people don't attack white people around this town for no reason. It must have been a dispute. I'm always puzzled by the onlookers in these stories. And so I understand the mother had the kids and I saw her reaction, but her mother was around. I mean, were there no men around? Were there no boyfriends, husbands, neighbors? Were there not anybody around? Distant relatives? Nobody at the paper said, hey, that woman's in trouble. We got to help her. Nobody in the police department, none of the dispatchers thought there was something weird here, or was she just some kind of troublemaker who kept calling the police every time the fellas were attacking her, harassing her, threatening her, and ultimately burning her house down? And they got 1 kid? That's what, so don't worry about the numbers in Middletown, Ohio. Don't worry about those numbers. You arrest 1 kid and convict him of a misdemeanor for burning down a whole house for 6 months worth of assault and threats and arson. And nobody looks at it and goes, I think I see a pattern. Good Lord, these people don't have the sense to come in from the rain. And so they teach reporters to ignore patterns, and all of a sudden we see 4-year-old little white girls, autistic white girls in buses being abused, punched, bitten by a black child, and everybody looks around and goes, well, I didn't see nothing, and even if I did see anything, it's not part of a pattern, right? It's random. But to say it's random is to say white people do it too. But that's the shoe that never drops. White people do it too, Colin. White kids are always surrounding the homes of black people and threatening to burn them down. Well, that happened in 1726. What do you think about that, Colin? Well, I think that's a fairy tale. I think that's a fairy tale that in no way justifies this enormous level of black violence and criminality so wildly out of proportion, so widely denied, so often in delusion, so frequently in deceit. But I'm starting to understand it. That's pretty much the only way we can not make the black kids angry.